Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and get started with our first webinar in this series, Managing Conflict in Teams, introducing the TKI Team Report. So before we get started, I want to make sure we cover a couple of admin things. So we are recording this webinar. We're going to send out the slides and a copy of the recording in the next few days. And you can submit questions to us at any time using the questions box. And we will also be using the questions box for engagement. So if anybody asks questions about experiences you've had, if you'd like to share a comment, essentially we're using the questions box like a chat box. So just make sure that that's where you put things if you want to communicate to us. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today. So first up, we have Ken. Ken is a PhD from Purdue University, and he is the co-author of the TKI Profile and Interpretive Report and the TKI Team Report. He is also the author of the TKI Introduction to Conflict booklet, among many other publications. His writing and research focuses on conflict management, meaning, and purpose at work, and he is currently located in Monterey, California. Cool. Next up, we have Ralph. And Ralph is the CEO and senior consultant at Kilmann Diagnostics and has a PhD in behavioral sciences and a BS in graphic arts management. He has published more than 20 books and 100 articles and is internationally recognized as an authority on systems change. He is currently located in Newport Beach, California. And finally, we have Gail. Gail is an educator, author, consultant, and executive coach. She specializes in communication, building collaborative capacity, conflict management, and team development. She has published more than 60 articles, chapters, and technical reports. Gail is also currently located in Monterey, California. So I will hand it over to you, Gail.
Right, thanks, Caitlin. And we're going to turn our cameras off now and still have our slides going, and you'll hear our audio, but cameras are going to be off now. So, okay. Again, thank you, Caitlin, and thanks everyone in the audience who took the time today to show up for the webinar. I know everybody's super busy, so we hope you'll get real value out of hearing what we have to tell you today. The Myers-Briggs company, Ken, Ralph, and I have been looking forward to sharing this new team report with you today, so we are super excited to have you all here. So before we get started here, we want to learn a little bit about experience for people in the audience. So Caitlin is going to help me in launching a poll. So if you would, on your keyboards there, answer one of these four responses. So the question is, what's your experience using the TKI assessment tool? So that's the current assessment tool that's out there now. Do you use it, if you're using it, do you use it predominantly with individuals? Check B if you're using it with individuals and teams. C if you use it kind of infrequently. And then last, if you've never used it, would be D. So if you will answer those questions and want an answer for us, then Caitlin's going to launch it so we can kind of see the experience level of the folks who are in the audience today.
And we are at 83% voted. So I'm going to close it in just 1 second and share the results.
Great. Thanks for your participation, everyone. That's good.
All right, results are on the screen.
Do you want to read those to us? I don't see it, Caitlin.
Absolutely. So it looks like we have 32% that use the TKI predominantly with individuals. We have 49%, so pretty much half, use the TKI with individuals and teams. 15% use the TKI infrequently, and 5% have never used the TKI.
Great. Okay, I see it now. Yeah, that's great. Okay, perfect. So we've got a pretty good sense of how people are using the TKI now, so that will really help us as we go forward here. Okay, so second question we have for you is if you're part of that 40% who are working with teams, And even if you're not using the TKI and working with teams, you can still answer this question. If you would, in this discussion box, put the types of teams you might be working with. So maybe they're cross-functional teams or product teams or whatever those might be. You could jot down as many answers as you want there. And we'll have Caitlin read those off to us so we can see. So just put that in the question box there. Caitlin, are you seeing anything?
Yes, I am. So we are
Okay.
seeing cross-functional teams, leadership teams, a lot of cross-functional and intergroups coming through right now, single department teams, executive teams across products and operations, kind of all over, but a lot of cross-functional, some school administrative teams, frontline teams, a lot of leadership teams coming through.
Right. Okay. So as I suspected, and it's good for us to know, there is a wide variety of teams that you all are working with. So that also helps us kind of think as, you know, what the audience is doing. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And feel free to keep those coming if you want to. Okay. So in line with that, these are the three main things we're going to talk about today during this webinar. First of all, I'm going to talk about what motivated us to create this TKI team report. Then Ralph and Ken are going to talk about the actual TKI team report itself, what it includes, what does a team profile look like, that type of thing. And then Caitlin's going to wrap it up with how do you administer the TKI team report. And then after that, I should say, we're going to have a question and answer period. So if you want to be jotting down questions either as we go or at the end there, we'll hopefully have, you know, plenty of time at the end to have some engagement with all of you around questions. Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about what motivated us. And really, I'm going to address two things. One is just how important teams are today in organizations. That's a huge trend in organizations and becoming even more important. And then second, also address some customer input that TMVC got is another reason why we designed this TKI team report. So kind of just starting with the idea about teams, I think most all of you, particularly those of you who are working with teams, or even if you're in a team, those are core to organizations today. And as work becomes more and more complex, the need for teams has even become more important. So we see teams in organizations as small as 2 people. Some people call a team 100 people, although I think Ralph and I in particular would say if it's that many people, you're probably talking about a lot of sub-teams or subgroups. So we know that those are really the building block of most organizations today. But what teams have in common is that they are members who interact with each other towards some kind of a common goal. And it's really that level of interaction that helps us determine what the boundaries of that team is. So as many of you have already mentioned today, you know, we have product teams, we have service teams, we have cross-functional teams, remote teams, hybrid teams, executive teams, and many others that you all mentioned. So there are so many types of teams today in organizations. And another trend that's important in teams, I do quite a bit of research on teams, is how fluid team membership is today. So we find that team members are moving on and off teams. There are teams that are short-lived, there are teams that are long-lived, and many people are on multiple teams simultaneously. So that's a real kind of trend in organizations today. And I'll use myself as an example. When I worked at the university not long ago, I was a member on numerous teams all at the same time. Some were kind of cross-functional across the university, short-lived teams. Others were long-term teams. I had many research teams that I was leading, my management faculty group. So there were many teams that, and at one point I counted more than 12 teams I was working on at the same time. So many of us are working on many teams simultaneously. So bottom line is, for me, I was spending a lot of time in team meetings where I was working with people who were sharing diverse perspectives. We talked about a lot of difficult issues. We hammered out ideas, and we made a lot of, in my mind, important decisions. And I think that's pretty common in today's organizations. And in fact, I'd argue that today's organizations are even more insistent on adding team members that have diverse perspectives on their teams. And so, and the research on high-performing teams say that diverse perspectives are central to that, but can only be worthwhile and work well if the processes are there to take advantage of those diverse perspectives. Otherwise, if it's not managed well, as we probably all know and unfortunately have been maybe part of, are teams that don't manage it well, and then the team and the organization suffers. So that leads me, with all those diverse perspectives, that leads me to the idea about teams and conflict management. So let's just take a moment to talk about that, because it's so central to what we're going to talk about today. And for those of you that have used the TKI or worked with conflict, I'm going to repeat the definition that we probably all know, that it occurs when people's concerns or the things they care about appear to be incompatible. So I just want to make one note about that. As a reminder, is conflict in and of itself is neutral. It's how you handle it and whether or not it becomes functional or dysfunctional. So it's really about differences of opinion, different perspectives, etc. So let me give you a quick example. You'll see in the little team to the right here in the slide. Judy here is working on her teams, and she is just sure that cost is the most important thing for this project they're working on. While Nate, her teammate, is saying, no, we need to focus on quality. That's really important. So there are a number of ways they could handle that difference, but if their goal was to be collaborative, they might want to try to work together to figure out how they might meet both Judy's needs and Nathan's needs, or Nate's needs. So there are many different ways to approach those differences. And we know, again, lots and lots of research around this, that well-managed team conflict, or those differences, can improve innovation, it can increase engagement, and it can boost performance. Research is pretty clear on that. On the other hand, we know that poorly managed team conflict can decrease morale, it can create delays, and unfortunately, I've even seen project failure. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to be able to manage that diversity to improve team performance. So what can be done to promote good conflict management? So one of the things we know is to become self-aware of how do you approach conflict, like we learned from the TKI. Another would be to discover how others on your team prefer to handle conflict. And then last, once we have some of that information, to be able to discuss the best way to handle conflict given the current situation. And we know, we won't go into a lot of that today, but there are times when different approaches to conflict are better than others, depending on the situation. So again, a lot of clear research on this, that teams who talk about how they work together, how they manage conflict, are more likely to be high performing than those that don't. And usually what we find is that kind of management of conflict comes about through training and education. So it's through those kinds of education that we are able to learn those processes and learn about ourselves and others to be able to do that. If we don't get that, again, as I said earlier, we'll see poor morale, retention issues I've seen, interpersonal tensions, and unfortunately we see lawsuits or worse, right, that come about from dysfunctional conflict in organizations. So we really don't want to set our teams up for, and organizations, for unintentional failure. And if you really think about it, that education and training that goes into conflict management, how to do that well, really gives us a good return on investment for the organization and for individuals and their teams. So it's a really good way to manage that. So let me talk a little bit about the second part. I talked about the motivation of why we created the TKI Team Report. Had to do with some customer input that TMBC was getting. So a number of years ago, they went out and asked TKI users, it might even been some of you in the audience here, and ask them about their needs for other TKI products. And probably no surprise, given the interest in the importance of teams that I just talked about a minute ago, and other things that were going on, they named Team Report as a priority. And in that query, TMBC also found out that customers had been creating their own team reports manually. So they were just taking individual reports. And truthfully, I was doing the same thing, creating spreadsheets, putting all the information in, and then creating my own, quote unquote, team report made from the individual reports. So once there was that need established, Ken, Ralph, and I, with the theoretical knowledge we all have about conflict management and many, many years that all three of us have experience working with teams and consulting and our graduate courses, came up with this new TKI Team Report that uses the TKI assessment tool, the one you're all familiar with if you've been using it, and but focus solely on teams with team profiles and specific guidance for teams. So that's what we're launching today. And it'll be a product that will automatically come up with team profiles, and it will provide specific advice based on that profile that you have on how to better manage conflict in your team. And Ken and Ralph are going to talk about that in a little bit. So along with the information that TMBC had, they asked users what kind of applications they saw for this team report. So this is after we had come up with a prototype. TMBC went out again and talked to users and said, okay, what do you think about this? So there's been a lot of customer input along the whole process of the creation of this team report. And here's what they said, or what some of you even might have said, is first of all, they could see where they could use it with an existing team. So either improving its team dynamics, obviously its performance, and it could either be a reactive intervention. So maybe you've got a team that's been struggling, who needs some help, and so this could be a way to help that team with some issue or challenging they might have. And then second, it could also be a proactive intervention if maybe you see a change coming down the line. Maybe there's going to be a new team leader coming on. Maybe there's a big change happening in the tasking of the team. So there may be ways that an existing team might find the TKI Team Report useful. And truthfully, again, using my own, have done it for that purpose many, many times. The next one they identified was a new team. So a lot of people maybe don't think about this, but this is an excellent way to start talking about diversity that might be as part of the team, and figuring out ways to set some norms for handling conflict as the team moves forward. So it can be a great way to ramp up a new team that's just come together. And then last, for leadership development. So it might be part of a formal program or curriculum. It could be part of individual coaching and development. TKI Team Report can be used alongside others, which I'm sure some of you who've been doing it on your own already, the MBTI, the 5OB, that's known as 5 dysfunctions of teams. So there's a number of, and I know I've done the same thing. I've used several other instruments in conjunction with talking about TKI and conflict in teams. So before I hand this over to Ralph and Ken, let's review quickly when you might use that TKI individual profile and interpretive report that's been around for quite a while versus this new TKI Team Report. So as you might suspect, the TKI profile and interpretive report is best for individuals who want to improve their skill building. It could be across any social situation or work setting, as many of you probably already doing. I have used it myself for university classes. It could be for general corporate training. There are many, many different ways in which you might be able to use that, or you have already been using that TKI report. The team report, as I've mentioned now, is going to be best when you're working with teams or groups that are interacting around a common goal. As I said, it could be as small as a team of 2, it could be a large team, but I think if you've got a large team, you really want to think about what might be the subgroups. So I know personally, I've worked with maybe a department, But that may have divisions that are divided into smaller groups. So we may take information from those smaller groups and then work with it as a larger group as a department. So there are many ways to do that. And then it also will help the team, of course, in functioning, and the goal is for higher performance is what we're looking for. So that's how you might use the TKI team report. So bottom line, the team report's designed to help a team improve its functioning and performance. And now I'm going to hand it over to Ralph and Ken, and they're going to talk in more detail about what is this team report, what does it look like, and what does the profile look like. So Ralph, if you want to take it away.
Thank you so much, Gail, for that overview of conflict teams and why we created the TKI team report. In this segment of the webinar, Ken will first discuss how the TKI conflict model, as well as the 5 conflict modes, can identify how team members can address their various team conflicts. Next, I'll discuss what is actually included in the different sections of the TKI team report, which presents the TKI team profile, as well as the team's tendencies for using one or more conflict modes too much or too little. Then Ken will discuss the particular challenges and remedies that follow from a team's high and low scores on one or more of the 5 conflict modes. At the end of this segment, I'll say a little bit about the free Facilitators Guide that Ken, Gail, and I developed so you can use the TKI team report most effectively for all kinds of teams in all kinds of situations. Okay, Ken, let's hear about the TKI conflict model.
Thanks, Ralph. Most of you are probably already familiar with the Thomas Kilmann conflict handling model. It's the foundational model for the individual TKI assessment. It's also central to the new TKI team report. And here you can see this, this picture, if you like, of the 5 conflict handling modes and how they work. You'll recall that the framework has 2 dimensions: assertiveness, the up-down dimension, or the extent to which team members attempt to satisfy their own concerns, and cooperativeness along the horizontal axis there, or the extent to which a team member attempts to satisfy other team members' concerns. So the framework defines 5 conflict handling modes. For example, the competing mode is high on assertiveness, but low on cooperativeness. The collaborative mode is high on both assertiveness and cooperativeness, and so on. The TKI assessment tool is used to determine possible overuse and underuse for each of the modes and to show when each of the 5 modes might be most useful in a given situation. Again, a lot of you will be familiar with that. The purpose of the TKI team report, on the other hand, is to focus on teams and groups and determine the number of people who might be overusing or underusing each of those 5 modes. Once the team has a language for talking about conflict, the team's TKI profile sets the stage for group discussions about the team's strengths and weaknesses regarding their approach to dealing with conflict. The TKI team report can also be useful in showing patterns that might be occurring in a team. For instance, let's say that you have a team leader who is overusing competing, while other members are overusing accommodating. If the team determines that the situation requires more collaboration, how might the team leader, who is competing too much, encourage more collaboration and less accommodation among the team members? Ralph is going to talk more about that later. But in summary, the framework offers all team members a means to diagnose their conflict handling behaviors and to engage in a discussion that would help them improve their team dynamics. Now, next, Ralph is going to talk more about the contents of the TKI team report and show you how the team profile works. Take it away, Ralph.
Thank you, Ken. As you can see on this slide, the TKI team report includes 5 major sections for each member on the team. But there's also a special 6th section that's only given to the facilitator, which we call the TKI Team Facilitators Report. Along the same lines as Ken discussed before, in the first section of the TKI Team Report, we first review the TKI Conflict Model from the perspective of member behavior in teams, rather than the usual practice of investigating an individual's conflict handling behavior across all kinds of social situations. We next display the team's TKI profile of its members' high, medium, and low scores, which then allows us to create a very useful chart for revealing the team's tendencies to use some modes too much and other modes too little. Also included in the TKI Team Report is a section that discusses the potential challenges that will unfold from the team's overuse or underuse of certain conflict handling modes. In that same section, we also suggest a number of practical remedies for improving how the team will manage its conflicts from this point forward. After the overall team aspects of the report have been presented and discussed in the TKI Team Report, we then provide the members' individual TKI results, so each respondent can compare their own high and low scoring conflict modes with the composite results for the team as a whole. I'll now show you an example of a TKI team profile. As you can see on this slide, the TKI team profile is developed from each team member's separate responses to the 30 A/B items on the TKI assessment tool. This example is from a team of 7 members. Notice that each box on the TKI team profile displays how many team members scored in the high, medium, and low range for that particular conflict handling mode. For the competing mode, which is high on assertiveness and low on cooperativeness, you can see that one member scored high, suggesting the possible overuse of that mode. You can also see that 2 members scored low, indicating the possible underuse of the competing mode. For the avoiding mode, which is low on assertiveness and also low on cooperativeness, you can see that 4 members scored high, indicated that these members might be overusing this conflict mode, while 2 team members scored low, suggesting the possible underuse of the avoiding mode. So what do these scores mean, practically speaking? On this slide, instead of only looking at how many members scored in the high, medium, and low range on each conflict mode, we can convert the team's TKI results into percentages of team members who are potentially using one or more conflict modes too much or too little, which will help us examine the relative use of the 5 modes for the team as a whole. Specifically, using a carefully constructed formula that is based on the latest research about managing conflict in teams, we show the relative rank order of the 5 modes, starting on top with the highest percentage of members scoring high on a particular mode, in this case, accommodating, going down to the bottom of the chart with the highest percentage of members scoring low on a particular conflict mode, in this case, compromising. Meanwhile, the other 3 conflict modes fall in between the potentially overused accommodating mode and the potentially underused compromising mode. In every TKI team report, based on the TKI team profile, as well as the TKI team tendencies, we discuss the typical challenges that are relevant to the team's highest scoring modes and its lowest scoring mode, as well as several practical remedies for improving the team's conflict handling behavior. Recall, for this team of 7 members, accommodating is the highest scoring mode, while compromising is the lowest scoring mode. Ken will now walk us through the several challenges and remedies for this particular team.
Thanks, Ralph. When we first showed TKI users this new section on challenges and remedies, they were very excited about it. They repeatedly said, "We like the way the team report identifies specific behaviors for teams that might be using a mode too much or too little. The challenges identify specific problems that a team might be having, but the remedies point to specific solutions that might address those problems. As a facilitator, then," they said, "I have several ready-made diagnoses that can improve the team's dynamics, things that I can look for and talk about." This section of the report goes beyond talking about possible overuse and underuse then, and offers specific forms of a behavioral mode that might be occurring in this team. So for each instance of overuse and underuse, we provide 3 challenges for interpersonal relations or ways that the team members might be treating each other. And also 3 challenges related to the team's decision making. So we're talking about interpersonal relations and decision-making issues. In total, the TKI Team Report offers 12 predictable challenges and associated remedies for the team. That's a lot of things to help the team facilitator make sense of what's happening in the team, right? Let's look at the interpersonal example for high accommodating team that Ralph described earlier. A team such as this may be tolerating negative behavior from their teammates. In this case, the associated remedy for a team member who tolerates negative behaviors would be to offer feedback and coaching to those team members. In summary, what we're doing is moving away from the general fact that the team is scored highest or lowest on a particular mode to what specific behaviors may be occurring and what team members can do about them. Now I'll hand it back to Ralph to talk about the next section of the TKI Team Report, the team members' individual profiles.
Thank you, Ken. I'll now discuss the section of the TKI Team Report that displays a team member's individual profile, which of course is different for every member of the team. Indeed, only the team profile and the TKI team tendencies are the same for every team member. On the left side of this slide, you can see the very familiar graph of a member's individual results from having taken the TKI assessment tool. To the immediate right of this graph, we display how that individual's own high and low scores compare with the composite high and low scores for the team as a whole. This 4-fold table is an easy and quick way for each member to compare their individual tendencies for overusing their highest conflict mode and underusing their lowest conflict mode with the team's overall tendency to overuse or underuse particular conflict modes. On this TKI individual profile, you can see that this team member scored highest on the avoiding mode. This person also scored high on accommodating. On the 4-fold table to the immediate right of the member's TKI individual profile, you can see that this member has a strong tendency to avoid conflict as compared to the overall composite of team members who have strong preferences for using the accommodating mode. Meanwhile, both the individual team member and the team member as a whole scored lowest on the compromising mode. As Ken suggested before, very predictable challenges emerge from the team's overuse or underuse of particular conflict modes. But more subtle challenges can also unfold when the preferences of individual members are very much at odds with the team's tendencies for approaching its conflicts. In a sense, any member might inadvertently discourage the team from using the most effective conflict mode in a given situation, which becomes a challenge to the team's effectiveness. While at other times, another member might be able to coax the team into using a particular conflict mode more often, such as the collaborating mode, even though this mode might not be the team's natural tendency. But such a change in team behavior, as influenced by the one member who strongly prefers to use the collaborating mode, might help the team dramatically improve its performance. As a result of openly discussing the challenges that the team faces, and by subsequently implementing one or more of the suggested remedies for overcoming these particular challenges, the team and its members can improve their conflict handling behavior. The team facilitator receives a special report that provides some additional information that is not contained in the TKI team report that each member receives. Specifically, as you'll see in a moment, the facilitator is provided with all the separate individual TKI results for each team member. Seeing all the members' TKI results can be very helpful in preparing for an upcoming team building session, as well as discussing the team's conflict handling tendencies during any training session. So long as all members have previously given their permission to have their TKI results shared with their other team members. Knowing how each member's conflict handling tendencies are the same or different from the team as a whole will suggest several ways in which the team can improve its conflict handling behavior. As you can see on this slide, the Facilitators Report provides an illuminating chart that reveals whether each individual member scored in the high, medium, or low range for each of the 5 conflict modes. In essence, this chart shows the relative contribution of each team member toward the overall profile for the team as a whole. For example, if you take note of all the high individual scores, as well as the several medium individual scores for the accommodating mode, it's no wonder that this mode came out as the highest scoring mode for the team as a whole. And if you now take a look at the several low scores and medium scores on the compromising mode, it's no wonder that the team's lowest score is for the compromising mode. To enable you as a team facilitator to make the best use of the TKI Team Report, the 3 co-authors have created a free Facilitators Guide, which you will receive from having attended this webinar. A sample TKI Team Report will also be available, so you can see exactly what's provided in this new report and how various individual team comparisons can pinpoint how members can improve their team functioning and thus their team's performance. In the interest of time, I'll provide just one example of the very valuable information that's contained in the free Facilitator's Guide. Instead of automatically using the general purpose instructions for the TKI assessment, which do not specify any situation at all, the Facilitator's Guide gives you the detailed instructions on how you can modify these standard TKI instructions so team members will respond to the TKI's 30 AB items according to how they address conflict inside their designated group and inside that designated group only. In sharp contrast, the standard TKI instructions do not focus attention on any specific conflict situation, whether at work or at home. As such, when individuals take the TKI with its standard instructions, they are being asked to provide their typical responses to conflict across all the various situations in their life, not focusing on any specific situation. The Facilitator's Guide discusses why you may want to use the standard TKI instructions or why you might want to use the modified team-specific instructions, particularly in those situations when the facilitator is only concerned with the conflict behavior in that designated team. When you receive your free Facilitator's Guide, you will see in several ways how you can get the most value from using the TKI tool for different kinds of teams in different kinds of situations. I'll hand it over to Caitlin now to look at how we administer the TKI Team Report.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to just briefly touch on some of the kind of top level things to note about this. So we will be releasing more information about specifics in regards to administering the report, but at a high level, just some things to note. So the report will be in the Elevate catalog. It is $29.95 per report, and that is per team member. So you would buy one for each person that you would want to be included in the team. And there are some standard volume discounts. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can let us know, inquire with us, and we can give you more details on that. And other than that, the process is pretty similar to using Elevate with the original TKI report. So if there are any specific questions, like I said, we will be sending out more information about it in detail, but feel free to submit questions and we will get back to you about this specifically. And now we will be just briefly touching on the upcoming webinars in this series. So we have another webinar in a week, which will be on developing teams using the TKI Team Report. So this will have step-by-step recommendations for using the team report in a workshop and that you can go ahead and register for if you have not already. And then we have one more webinar coming up on October 26th, which is managing conflict for 3 types of teams. So in this one, we will be looking at 3 different types of teams that can benefit from understanding more about how they approach conflict and how you can use the TKI Team Report more effectively with them. And all of these are listed under our event section on the Myers-Briggs.com. We will also be sending this out in the follow-up emails that will include the recording and slides. So we will include links to these webinars specifically as well in case you have not registered. So we are now going to go ahead and move on to the question and answer section. I have been seeing a bunch of questions come through, so I'm going to just quickly read a few of them and just make sure that we have the right ones queued up here, because a bunch are coming in now. If you haven't submitted a question and you have one, please feel free to. Okay, so first question, does the report include the leader of the team? Meaning, within the stats that are shown in the team report, is the leader of the team included?
Yeah, I can answer that. We have found that most teams have one leader. Sometimes they even have co-leaders. And yes, if it makes sense in the development of that team to see how that leader or co-leaders are affecting the team in terms of conflict handling behavior, you want to include it. There might be some occasions, however, where the discussion is not quite ready to be open when the leader is present. And so we make use of peers. And so every group is in a peer, and the leader of that group responds in a group that is of that person's peers. And then at some time in the future, we can re-enter the leader in the groups because they will all be managing conflict much more effectively.
I agree. And I've used it in all those different instances, not obviously the new report, but as I've done it manually, I've sometimes included the leader depending on the situation, sometimes not. Sometimes, you know, those answers are available to everyone, so everyone can see everyone's profile, and sometimes they are not. So it really depends, you as a facilitator working on that team, but you would have the flexibility to do any of those approaches.
I guess in all those cases, you always ask the question, what arrangement leads to the greatest possibility for learning and change, with or without the leader present, or under what other circumstances? And then we proceed to enhance the development of conflict handling behavior, and then we have more options for creating teams in the future.
I have nothing to add to that. I think great suggestions.
Perfect. Okay, so the next question that I have here, do you have any other examples that you can share of the interventions or recommendations other than coaching? I don't know if you remember any of those other examples off the top of your head.
Yeah, I have tons of examples. I could talk all day because I actively am doing this kind of work. So one is executive teams. We use it with executive teams. So, and it can be the kickoff session so that teams know better. They take a number of different instruments. So they may take the MBTI, EQI, some others, and it's a way to actually jumpstart a team. And what we have found out from these executives and the leader of that team is that it will kind of accelerate their team development, probably 6 months. We usually do a 2 or 3 day session, of which this is part of that. It's a really good way to give feedback and have these discussions before maybe they go down a wrong path. Or, you know, the first 6 months, a lot of times teams are just kind of feeling each other out. So this is a way that a new leader can immediately learn about his or her team and really move things forward that way. And I've worked with struggling teams, like I said, new teams. I'm doing a lot of work with virtual teams. So, and there will be more about that in detail on those future webinars too. We'll go into a lot more detail. So I don't know if there's any more specific question that someone wants to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to add that, as you, Gail, said earlier, conflict itself is neutral. Whether it is effective or ineffective, functional, dysfunctional, depends on how it is managed. And one thing that group discussions on conflict management do is they give everyone on the team a common language for talking about a topic that they've often shied away from. They usually say, let's talk about how we manage conflict. That doesn't come up in the normal course of business. But in a development workshop, we can provide a language for talking about conflict using the TKI Conflict Model and the 5 modes, and then people have that as a repertoire so that during the course of the work, they can say, oh, this sounds more like I'm accommodating when in fact I've learned I've got to be more assertive so the team can benefit from my technical expertise. So that language gets embedded in the team as the team develops and grows.
Yep. I just want to add to that what Ralph said, that what you're doing is you're making this stuff not scary anymore. I don't know how many teams I've been in where people are sitting on and going, oh, he's doing it again, you know, and then sometimes it boils over and it becomes highly dysfunctional. What we're doing is giving people, as Ralph says, a language to talk about this and a forum really for discussing it with some guidance, with, you know, a coach there, whatever, to provide some guidance. Yeah.
And I also find this is a really nice jumping off point for other skill building. So for instance, I have a person I work with a lot. We will do this establishing norms for a team, whether it's a new team or sometimes, you know, we work with very dysfunctional teams that need to reset norms for how they're going to work together. We also use it for teaching how to give each other feedback. So when you notice something that violates those norms, how do you make it okay for people within the team to give each other feedback so that they don't go off the wrong path? So this couples very nicely with a lot of other similar skill building.
Yeah, I should mention a key intervention that I have found to be very helpful is that you have the team in a safe workshop session develop a list of the remedies and what they plan to implement back on the job. But then you often find when they go back to work, it's as if the workshop never took place because it's back to business as usual. In fact, I call that the 3-day washout effect. 3 days after the workshop, it's all gone. So what we do as an intervention is perhaps a few weeks or a month later, we hold another discussion. What has changed? What has gotten better? What has gotten worse? And why? And the first time they hold that follow-up meeting, they discover that no one talked about conflict back in the workplace. And they have to find mechanisms so what they learned in the workshop will be moved into the workplace. Otherwise, it doesn't count. You can't just have a good discussion about conflict in a safe situation, and then at the workplace, you don't talk about it anymore, and you get back into dysfunctional conflict. So it seems that in terms of intervention and coaching, a number of follow-up activities and discussions are needed to break old habits and to bring change behavior into the workplace.
So one thing I'll add, Ralph, we could probably go on for days about this. So in the Facilitator's Guide, we've actually developed templates and examples of SMART goals for both the team and for individuals. So at the end of a session, ideally, the team and individuals would develop goals. And just like Ralph said, you know, maybe a month later or whatever, you revisit. And those goals, I mean, you can actually set those goals up as performance goals too, right? For helping development, either for the team or for individuals. So there's a lot of very specific kinds of guidance on how to continue to do this so that it becomes an integral part of the team.
Great. Okay, I have another question. So is anybody, and I'm assuming someone is, but is anybody looking at conflict and how this is having an impact on behavior in virtual environments versus being face-to-face?
I am. Ralph, do you want to speak first?
No, you go ahead, Gail.
Yeah, so actually I've given several presentations on this topic. It's a line of research that I'm doing too. And so looking at and that will also be part of webinar 3. I'm going to talk about hybrid teams, but what are those situations and how remote or hybrid teams might be different than our face-to-face. And there's actually some fascinating new research around this, because remote teams aren't new, right? We've had remote teams for a long time, but since the pandemic, that environment has changed dramatically. And I would argue that some of that research that was done before really doesn't apply as much today. So some does, some doesn't. So I can talk in more detail about that, and I'll talk about that in webinar 3. But yes, there's a lot. In fact, I talk about in my presentation, just the fact that we had to go remote. I don't know about you, but in my university, we had fights all over the place, like not good conflict, about how we were going to deal with things. Like we were going to go online, what were going to be the rules for how we came to school, about mask wearing. So just that in and of itself created a lot of conflict that needed to be handled. So there are many, many ways in which the environment we're working today, conflict is going to be just key to things that we do. So Ralph, I don't know if you want to add something there.
Yeah, what I have discovered is that the remote kind of meetings creates a certain social distance. Even though you see people in front of you on the screen, you don't feel them in the same way as when there's live and you can feel their energy directly. And as a result, sometimes people can be a little bit more insensitive, not showing as much empathy as compassion because they're talking about someone on TV or someone on the screen, and it's not that immediate presence. I found the same thing when people try to approach conflict with writing emails to one another. They tend to be sloppier. They tend to be not as sensitive to the words they're using. They quickly hit send before they've read it through. So again, when there's ever any distance, even if the person's on the screen, it's not the same thing as being live in the same room and being with the person and feeling the energy. So I think we need to be sensitive to that.
Great, thank you. So I do have a couple of questions that are a little bit more about the administration that I am going to quickly just touch on. So I have seen a couple of these come through, so I'm going to answer them more broadly, but essentially, if you have a group of people complete the TKI team report and a new member is added to the team, do you need to take the assessment again? The answer is no. You will just add that new person to the Elevate project, and then they will complete the assessment, and it will generate the new report for you. The next one that I'm getting a lot of questions about is basically the reverse of that. If you have a team that takes the TKI team report and someone leaves the team, do you have to retake the assessment? Also, no, you will just remove that team member in the Elevate project and it will generate a new report. And then the last one that I'm getting a lot of is if a team has previously taken the TKI assessment and gotten the profile and interpretive report, do they need to take the assessment again? And that is also a depends question. If all of the team members were part of the same Elevate project when they did the TKI profile and interpretive reports, you can just add the TKI team report to that project and then generate it. If they were not, then you will need to do it with a new Elevate project. So I know that was a little bit quick, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of those. And if you have more specific questions, you can go ahead and email us and we will help answer those. So I do have more questions for our speakers here. So I just wanted to make sure I got those ones out of the way. Would you say that the new team instrument replaces the old profile and interpretive report, or should they be using them in different scenarios?
Yeah, I would say that they have different purposes, but there is a gray area. So for example, if you're dealing with a classroom situation where the students have never really interacted with one another before, and that classroom does not define an organization or department as such, then you would use the individual report that does not focus on the team. And therefore, each individual student is simply learning about their own conflict handling styles, and it's not dependent on what the other students are doing in the classroom. That could also be in a corporate training program. And it's also, as Gail mentioned, if you're dealing with large numbers like 50 or 100, there's probably subgroups involved. So it may not even make sense to think of them interacting regularly with one another. But at the other extreme, if you have a group of 5, 10, 12 people, they interact with one another all the time, they have conflict, they have difficulty with conflict, then to look at the team perspective will probably be invaluable. And that's when you'd use the TKI team report and not the individual TKI report. Now, the gray area is what if you're dealing with a team where some people have interacted with one another, others not. It may be about 20, 22 people. there may be that gray area where you may want to try it with the individual or you may want to try it with the team. There's no hard and fast rules. But I do believe that the Facilitator's Guide has some information in there which will help you decide which way to go in that gray area.
I think between the two, we're just going to have a lot of flexibility. I can just see a lot of different ways when I might use the individual versus when I might use the team. So I think it's just going to give people a lot of flexibility on how they're doing their consulting work or training work right now.
Great. So the next question that I have is there any thought about, or has this been used for youth teams, like middle school or high school?
I have not. I can see where it could be useful. Again, I think when we were talking about this idea of building a language, part of these things, as we all know, when you boil up with feelings around things and don't have a language for talking about it or thinking about it or become self-aware. I'm sure all of you who've used this before, I mean, the thing I get, what I think is so wonderful about the TKI is the huge aha that people get when they learn this basic framework, because they never had a language for thinking about this. And so all of a sudden it takes a lot of the mystery out of it, and it allows you to just be more aware and be more thoughtful about how you deal with those situations. Ralph, I don't know if you've had, or any of the people you work with have had experience with middle school.
Yeah, I would mention this, that the TKI, the original, was developed in what we called 7th grade English. So the language is not complicated. So anyone from 7th grade onward should be able to understand all the questions and respond. Now, is it being used in middle school, let alone high school? I think there's opportunities for high school students to already learn about conflict management. Why not start them early rather than having to do remedial work when they're in organizations? There could probably be more psychology classes in high school and how to manage conflict and your behavior, emotional intelligence, rather than just some of the typical courses to prepare you for college. How about preparing you for life? So I think that's a great opportunity to bring the understanding and the use of conflict management well before college into high school and perhaps middle school as well.
I really agree with that last point. Yeah, I just, and that's such a key period in people's lives, and people, I think students bring what they've seen at home or from other friends in the neighborhood or something like that. A lot of times it's kind of dysfunctional stuff. So to be able to study it, have a language for it and so on, and see the possibilities, I see that as a very helpful thing. And if I were running a school, and especially if it were a boarding school and these people were there all the time, I would want to develop a cohort using these tools. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I think our last question based on timing is going to be, are there any activities or suggested activities in the Facilitator's Guide?
Yes, definitely. So again, I hate to keep referring to the next webinar, but the next webinar, the first part of the Facilitator's Guide is kind of what Ralph said, kind of the basics, but then the second part is how to do a workshop. And we actually have a 3-hour workshop template in there and specific activities that you can use to run a whole workshop if you're not familiar with doing this or just want some ideas. I always learn from other people too. So there's some very specific kinds of things in there, including there's a team assessment about different types of conflict in addition to this TKI assessment on really understanding the context that the team's in and being able to look at that in addition to the TKI results. So there are many, many different tools that are going to be in that, or that are in the Facilitator's Guide, that you all will have access to.
Yeah, I'd also like to put the topic in a much broader perspective. And that is that when Ken and I developed the TKI in the early 1970s, there was virtually no discussion about conflict anywhere. There might have been a segment in a sociology course, a political science course, but conflict was not a major topic in any kind of training program. We did not anticipate the globalization that took place, the barriers that were broken down internationally in trade, the diversity in the workplace, the amazing conflicts we've experienced with just not climate change, the pandemic, with politics. Right now, conflict is like in every conversation. Just listen to the news. So we're talking about a topic that has become so relevant, far beyond what it was when Ken and I first developed this assessment.
Okay.
Good point.
That was all the time that we have for today. I know there is a bunch more questions that came through, so if we didn't get to your question, we will be responding, following back up through emails. And just a reminder, we will send out the recording and a copy of the slides, as well as links to the Facilitators Guide, because I know a bunch of people are asking for that in the questions right now. So just a reminder, make sure you register for the next 2 webinars. As Gail mentioned, there's going to be a lot more information that we've gotten questions about in those, but that is all that we have time for today. So I'd like to go ahead and thank our speakers so much for all of this helpful information, and thank everybody for joining, and have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everybody. This is great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.